Professor Kahne. First of all, I'd like to thank you for accepting our invitation to give a talk.
Well, I'm honored that you asked me.
Thank you. I know you very well. You are one of the eldest IFAC athletes and one of the most well-known people in IFAC, and also a previous IFAC president.
Yeah.
So, would you like to tell us a bit about yourself and also the first days of IFAC and what was the initial motivation and how IFAC did up to today about this motivation? Thank you.
Well, it all started in the late 1950s, which wasn't so long after the war. During the war period, control engineers, scientists of various sorts, did a lot of important work. Unfortunately, that's what happened during the war. But that technology was really important. But of course, they couldn't communicate it very well with each other for security reasons. There's different sides, and although they're friends, they're not friends like now because transportation was much more difficult. And there was no telecommunications of any sort. So it was a different time, and yet there was a feeling after the war that these folks who had been working on control problems wanted to get together and share information, and things were opening up. So I guess the concept of IFAC probably started earlier in the 1950s at other conferences, because there were no conferences during the war. And by the early 50s, there were a few people getting together. I think there was a conference in Cranfield in Great Britain, and 2 or 3 other ad hoc conferences. But people were beginning to get to know each other, and they decided we should do something. This is an emerging field. Technology is changing very quickly. I remember I went to Cornell and was there in the early 1960s, late 50s. And in my last electronics class, we learned about transistors. All of our studies were with vacuum tubes, and microminiaturization wasn't even defined then. But there was this scientific, from the material side, scientific developments that was leading to microcircuits and so on. So anyway, the technology was moving fast, people wanted to communicate, and all of a sudden they were free to communicate, which they weren't before. So in 1957, at a conference in Heidelberg, a group of people from about 10 or 12 countries got together and decided we should form an organization. And it was called the International Federation of Automatic Control, which was a term that was very much in vogue in those days. I think if we had to name this organization today, maybe the word automatic wouldn't be there. Maybe systems should be there, and that was debated early in its history, but it was more important to get things done than to worry about names. So there was the Iron Curtain was very much in place. There was the wall, conceptual wall, if nothing else, and there was a behind the Iron Curtain and in front of the Iron Curtain issue where people lived and they worked. So this had to be sorted out, even though IFAC was not intended and never has been politically sensitive. At that time, there had to be certain rules. And so what they agreed on, a bunch of academics, I think almost all academics, but people like Gordon Brown and Nichols, Nathaniel Nichols charts, and Bodie, who was around. He wasn't part of that group, but he was part of the professional society, but not so much of a control guy. He was a kind of a communications communications guy. So it was decided that, all right, we're going to set this up, but we have to have a balance. There were, I think, 8 members originally, something like that, maybe 9, maybe 10, but I don't think 10. And included the United States, and included, at that point, Japan. It did not include Germany, because Germany was split. And the East Germans and the West Germans couldn't decide who would represent Germany, and so Germany was not involved in the first days as part of the founding group, what became the Executive Council. And that wasn't straightened out for 2-3 years, actually. But in the meantime, the East Germans actually offered a secretariat for IFAC. And there was a fellow by the name of Ruppel, who actually was a secretary, and Prof. Schroeder, who was his assistant or secretary, I don't know. So they participated, but not as members of the board. So by 1959, maybe 58, it was decided that there would be an American first president, but a Russian first Congress. And so the person in the United States was Hal Chestnut, who was by then well known because he had a book on control. Nichols had published a lot, but it wasn't visible, and then MIT put out their MIT Lab series in which the Nichols chart appeared. So those were the basic players. There was a lot of input from industry, which was important because over time, the input from industry went down and then came back. But at the beginning, Chestnut was at GE, at General Electric, and Nichols was at the Lincoln Labs, part of MIT, but a research institution there. Anyway, the first Congress, so Chestnut was the first president, and unlike all other presidents, he only served about 1.5 years or 2 years in preparation for having a person who was going to run the Congress be president for a while before the Congress. So Alexander Letov was the Russian. He worked in a lab that was run by Trapeznikov. In those years, all control engineers in Russia had one address. It was the Institute of Moscow, run by Trapeznikov, who never became IFAC president, but was very instrumental in the whole Russian situation. So that began, and then the first written documents, which ended up being a constitution, called for a triennial cycle, 3 years, and the presidents would serve for 3 years, except the first couple didn't. In fact, the first 3 didn't, because Gericke, who became the third president from Switzerland, took over, and he served kind of Chestnut and Letov and Gericke comprised about 5 years of the first days. Ending, or in the middle, it was the Congress in Moscow, and at the end, it was the Congress in Basel, Switzerland, which was the first one I attended. I was too young. I was just getting into graduate school at the time of the Moscow Congress, so I didn't go to that. But I've gone to all the other ones, every single one. This is my 21st.
Oh.
And I'm getting older, and I wondered if I should take this, but it's too important to me. All right, so that was the initial setup. And rules are being put into place. There were 3 technical committees, applications, theory, and practice, or something like that. There was a couple of committees that sound unusual now, a biographical committee, because all this stuff was lying around, hidden in various countries during the war, and now it had to be gathered. And terminology had to be established. There was a terminology committee. And there were multilingual glossaries created so that people would have the same language. That was in Russian, French, German, maybe not German, English, and maybe some other language. And these exist. These are books on shelves now. It's on my shelf. And it's another story how I tell them. But anyway, and of course, young people were coming out. There wasn't a lot of graduate education before this because kids had to go to war in the various countries. But of course, the new generation was already being considered and so on. So then it began systematically in about 1962. It was determined by the 1966 Congress would be in London. John Coles being president. John was an established industrial guy who went into Cambridge around that point and became a professor at Cambridge and ran the lab there and so on. And he was really instrumental in the stabilization and foundations of IFAC. And there were a group of other people. I won't mention all of the names particularly, but it became a real organization. And there was a Congress in London. Basel Congress was very much of an industrial fair kind of operation because many people in the industry were involved in control. And the Basel Congress had a big industrial component that declined over time. But London also had some industrial shows. I don't remember many details. I was there, and I remember a lot of things. For example, Prince Philip was the opening speaker.
All right.
The Queen's husband. And it's interesting because at this Congress, of course, the Emperor was here for the opening ceremony.
Yes.
So it wasn't very common. I would have to think more carefully to remember if there are any other heads of state that opened the IFAC Congresses.
Not many, I believe.
Yeah, I think not many, exactly. The following Congress after London was in Warsaw, Poland, with Paweł Nowacki, who was a electrical nuclear engineer, ran a lab called Schwerk. I don't know, I think that was the name of it. It was some kind of a research lab, I think a little bit outside of Warsaw. But he was an interesting guy because he spoke 5 languages fluently. And so around it's called the Executive Council at that time, around the table, people would ask questions in their own language. He would respond in their language. But in addition to that, in those days, we were publishing not only proceedings in English, proceedings were published also in Russian and in French. There were IFAC languages in those days.
All right.
A topic that came up during the preparation of the first constitution, those kind of requirements. Simultaneous translations, even.
Okay.
And so these were the old days. Of course, everything was done on paper,
Yes. No computers, no internet.
Okay. There were typewriters, and there was this little white stuff that you used to clear the errors, and there were mimeograph machines, which were. I became involved very much in IFAC publications over the decades, and I remember this evolution. So then there was Nowacki, and for me, one of the most important things is he had a daughter.
All right.
So I met my wife in Warsaw
I see.
at that Congress. And that leads to other questions, but that's not important.
So World Congress does not only serve for science, but sometimes serve for some other social issues.
Exactly, and we've always referred to ourselves as a family, the IFAC family. And for me, that was really important, and it's been important for everybody up to now. And I'm just hoping that will continue. With the virtual meetings and so on, it's a little harder to get to know people, but I think it'll continue. And that's been one of the real strengths. Other professional societies were starting at that time. IFIP, International Federation Information Processing, started at that time. But somehow I've had quite a stable development, whereas IFIP, which now is very powerful and very wealthy, because it's focused on computers and communication. But we rode through that pretty well. I didn't play any serious role until London when I became a TC vice chairman. Education, it was education. And the number of committees were slowly growing at that time. And then we went from Warsaw to Paris to Boston, 1975, to Helsinki, 1978, and so on, and it went on for many years. IFAC did not have any publication, no journal at that time, and there was some concern that we didn't want to, or they didn't, I still wasn't that active, but they wanted to be sure they weren't competing with local technical journals. And many of the organizations that joined IFAC and most had their own journals in their own language.
All right.
And so there was a fear there might be some tension, and we worked that out. But by the 70s, it became evident we really needed to have a journal.
All right.
And at the same time, Robert Maxwell, who was the owner of Pergamon Press and the owner of a football team in England and the owner of a lot of stuff, and his story is very interesting, and we won't spend much time on it. But his interest was associating his company with a serious professional organization.
All right.
And he was a friend of John Coles,
Mm-hmm.
Cambridge, and Maxwell worked out of Oxford, actually, and London. And so the negotiation began. Well, Pergamon wants to have a journal. We decided we probably should have one.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the questions was who would edit this journal. And Maxwell, who knew quite a bit about the IEEE and didn't have any professional connection with it, but knew about it, and knew that George Axelby was the editor of the IEEE Transactions on Automatic Control,
All right.
which had started in the 60s, or maybe, I guess, even in the 50s. It was called the IRE at that time,
Mm-hmm.
because the IEEE is a combination of the American Institute of Electrical Engineers and the Institute of Radio Engineers. Those are the IRE and the IE. So anyway, after these negotiations, IFAC decided it would get a single publisher to publish all its journals. There was only one at that time. But the editor, Maxwell, insisted the editor had to be George Axelby. So it would take a couple of years to put that together. And George was very dedicated to the IEEE journal, his baby. He started it in the 50s. So that led to the IFAC Publications Program, which I became very much involved with. I was an associate editor and then editor-in-chief of the Transactions on Automatic Control for the IEEE in the early 70s. And then Maxwell said, okay, I have this journal that's not doing well. It's called Automatica. And we have a couple of honorary editors. Coles was the honorary editor of that journal. But it wasn't making money, and they didn't have the connection with the professional society.
All right.
The guys that ran it were well-known people, but IFAC hadn't quite gotten itself together. So the result of all of this is we signed a contract with Elsevier after a competition. There were 2 or 3 other competitors.
Okay.
And it was decided it would be Pergamon Press. Incidentally, Elsevier was a competitor, but lost out.
Mm-hmm.
So Pergamon Press. And we had a contract that included this publication's managing board, which is a fairly complicated story in itself. And I think I'd like to refer you just to the IFAC story,
Mm-hmm.
which is a book that I led the writing of in 10 years ago now.
All right.
That describes all of this. And finally, IEEE had its own journal. It took over the name of Automatica, it changed it to the IFAC Journal, and so it became known that way. And that has turned out to be, from a professional point of view, it was great. Because if you read the book, you'll find out that everybody was publishing stuff and you couldn't find. You went to a conference, it was published by a local printer, and then 10 years later you couldn't find them.
Yeah.
So that's how it started. And I think the publications, which now turns out to generate twice the income of any other source for IFAC, for some of all the other forces, and it was very well managed in a complicated but professionally correct way. And Maxwell loaned the money to start with, and I don't remember if we paid him back. But it's been a great relationship, and it exists right now, of course.
Yeah.
Now it's got, IFAC now has 8 journals, all published by Elsevier. Because, one of the steps is that Pergamon was bought by Elsevier after we started.
Yes.
And so our contract with Pergamon became a contract with Elsevier. And that
see.
goes on. And that's managed in a slightly unusual way, but I don't think we have to go to that now.
Oh, okay.
But that's how the whole thing started. And I was fortunate to be around and to go to Warsaw. And so 50 years later, we're still married and we're
That's great. Okay. Thank you, actually. Thank you for answering. So it seems that IFAC has done a lot of things and a very important job for bringing all the scientists around the world after a very difficult era.
Yeah.
And then joined all these scientists together in the area of control.
Yeah.
And it's doing very well until this point.
Right.
So how about the future?
Yeah.
Or what do you see in the future in terms of IFAC and also in terms of control engineering?
Yeah. Well, IFAC has always had members which are national member organizations.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, an individual is not a member of IFAC. Mm-hmm. It was only very late, maybe in the 80s, that the term affiliate came up for individual members. So that's being discussed even today.
Yes.
But it does exist, and it's very useful. So the organization spread from 3 or 4 technical committees to now 40 technical committees, and that required a change in structure. So in the late 70s and early 80s, a new constitution was created. John Coles was instrumental in that, and Janusz Gertler, who recently died, and I put together a new constitution. And of course, it went through all the processes, and finally, I think it was adopted in Hungary in the Budapest Congress in 1984. So people got involved, students got involved, and it became a really solid organization. The future holds probably more and slightly changed technical structures. For example, the idea of CCs, of coordinating committees, came in because you couldn't have, the technical board consisted of all of the technical committee chairs, and there were 40 of them, so you can't have 40 reporting to one. Mm-hmm. So the CCs were created, now there are 9 of them, and they've been very effective in kind of managing the technical part. The publications part is another thing, I won't describe it in detail. And then, of course, there are other activities that go on, conferences and this kind of stuff. And the publications tracked all of that. And that worked pretty well, but there was still a lot of paper. And so when the internet arrived, and finally, I'm guessing email started in the late 70s. Not the internet, it was still coming.
Probably a bit later than it has become more and more popular.
Exactly. And now essential.
Yes, sure.
I mean, we have meetings here, and if there hadn't been 10,000 notes shared and views of websites, we couldn't get anything done. For a long time, IFAC was quite focused on theory. And the industry side was always, well, it's a different game. People who work in industry don't have the same performance requirements that people in academia have. Typically, and I'm going to exaggerate greatly, but typically industry is not so interested in the papers written and the peer review by outsiders. In fact, they want to keep it inside their house.
Sure.
And that makes sense. So where is that leading me? That's leading me to talk about how industry is getting more and more involved now, and I think very important. Even though, in my country, for example, the leadership in the control field for the first 10 years of IFAC were all industrial people. And then slowly it got more balanced, and then the industry, because of the focus on writing papers, and getting peer reviewed and having to go to a conference and spending 10 or 20 minutes talking about your paper and then going home, that's pretty expensive. The academics tend to be more gatekeepers and preparing the foundations. But if you really want to involve industry, you can't do it the same way. And so over the years, we've created new schemes, and the most recent one is this Industry Connect, IFAC Industry Connect. It's running panel discussions recorded on now Zoom, but whatever was available. And that, I think, is going to attract more industry, and it's a nicer venue. So the group of industrial people, probably remote almost always, sitting around talking about a topic of interest in which they are experts. Their companies are experts. So for pre-competitive discussions, that's great. Of course, there's still a lot of technical details you don't want to share, or industrial folks don't want to share. So I think that's an important beginning to get industry fully involved. Even though, as I said in Basel, one of the big parts of the Congress in 1963 was an industrial exhibit. Sort of like Intercom or like the Hanover Fair now. Not that big, but that style. And that hasn't happened. It's too expensive, moving equipment around and so on. So that's kind of the present. That's where we stand. The leadership the rule has always been the president and the venue for the Congress from the same country.
But now it's changed.
Now it's changed, and that's a substantial change.
Yeah.
I don't know any other society that did it that way. But the way it started, because of the war and the Iron Curtain and so on and so on, it kind of evolved that way. Now it hasn't, and that's good. It will never go back. I predict it's not talk about the future. It's not going to go back.
Yeah, I hope so. Because I believe it's a good idea to be able to, because it's not compulsory. It's an option for many countries.
Sure.
To do this thing together.
Yeah.
So. Yeah,
that's right. And certainly, if automatic control isn't involved with industry, what's it doing? Proving theorems? It could be mathematics. So that's a change. Now going farther, of course, the pandemic stimulated this virtual operation, which has been adopted by everybody out of necessity in some people's case. Previously, until Zoom came, and there may have been another fairly early conscious thing, but nothing like Zoom. So now the operation is more virtual. It means younger people that don't have much money for traveling, can fully participate at a reduced fee and a reduced cost to their institution, especially industry people, where they can participate during working hours or with the recordings.
Yeah.
So that's certainly the beginning of a future. Where we'll go from here, who knows? I'm not a metaverse person. I can't even spell it. So I don't know if that kind of technology will have a big impact or not. Automatic control, on the other hand, has a big impact on all these developments, whether it's the virtual glass or whatever it is. And that's been one of our blessings and one of our reasons for not being as well known as we should be. It's in everything. It always been in everything.
Yes.
Even before there was electricity, it was the mechanical. Buttons and so on. So that kind of evolution is coming. With all of the social issues coming up, especially the climatic ones, automatic control, and not even automatic sometimes, but control man-machine relationships and so on, are becoming more evident. I'm not convinced that maybe we're going to have automatic automobiles. I mean, I don't know. I kind of enjoy driving. I'd like a little help. That's good. I want to be safe. That's very important. But to take the human out of the automobile driving seems a little...
A bit scary.
Yeah, it's a bit scary. It happens that I live near Phoenix, Arizona, which have very wide, long, straight streets. So we have a lot of experimentation. That's it. That's where the proof is going on.
Alright.
I don't know if that helps. Predicting the future is hard, as you know.
Yeah, sure.
But I don't think the importance of control is going down. I think it's only going up. I've spent the last part of my career, after retirement mostly, working in social systems.
Mm-hmm.
I've been in a hospital. I've gone out of my way to introduce myself to hospital boards. I've been on hospital boards, mental health boards, juvenile court,
Mm-hmm.
foster children, and there are real problems that the control community can contribute to.
Yeah.
Feedback is fundamental to all of those things, even though they don't think of it that way. And systems with delay, that's, for me, that's emerging as maybe the most important topic,
Mm-hmm.
because these are very complicated problems. They involve children or patients or whatever, and they're doctors and they're lawyers and they're the government, and there's the social service people, and so on. And that's a coordination problem. But when you have, and it introduces inherent delays.
Sure.
And the control people know, hey, delays means instability. That's kind of my definition. And yet, what I found is these boards, and I'm not talking about dealing with children. I did have a period of that, but that's another story. These boards appreciate the systems viewpoint,
Yes.
but no systems people will come because they don't speak the language, and people look at, you're an engineer, you're hard work, that's interesting, but it really pays off. Yeah, I see much more of that. That's why CC9 has a lot of potential importance. But, and I just made that comment in the session a little while ago, the engineers have to push their way in and say, I know I don't speak your language, but I'm here to learn. So I'm going to be quiet, teach me. And then maybe you'll find that I have something to offer.
Mm-hmm.
Me, a control engineer. And that's a potential. And the other thing about that is you involve more women naturally, because that's their domain.
Mm-hmm.
And they get a little nervous. These are the kind of people we haven't seen before, but that was a good point he made. That added to the value of what we're doing. So I see us getting more integrated in society, not only mechanics, not only automobiles and airplanes and process control and steel and so on, all of the stuff we've done forever. But now I can see a growing and recognizable set of contributions for the social science, the social industries.
All right. Okay, that's great. I mean, thank you very much for your comments. I believe they are very valuable, especially the ones that more integration with social systems and control engineering would be, I believe, also one of our possible features.
Yes, and for me, it's important that the youngest people in our field either come from these areas, or at least are technical people that are helping themselves in because they're interested and they have a lot, turns out they have a lot to offer.
Okay, that's great. Actually, this leads me to my next question, because it's very much related. What are your suggestions for young control engineers or engineers to become control engineers?
Well, it's easier for them to do this now than it used to be. I very much advocate early involvement in your professional societies, not only national but international. And now with the technologies we have, the communications, Zoom and so on, it doesn't cost that much. It's not like having, if I join that organization, I have a meeting on the other side of the world.
Okay.
And I think it helps the students, if they are professors, helps students realize that there's a lot of places they can go to work. They don't have to become a professor of engineering if they don't want to. So it's a very broadening experience, but I've seen that people worry about that. Oh no, my department head, he knows I'm involved in something, social science. I may not get tenure, or I may not progress as I want to. And so management, academic management has to understand this too.
Yeah,
I think they are. And it's international. That is, it's no different in Turkey than in the United States. That push, and you learn a lot from other people too.
Yes, sure. Okay. Thank you, Professor, for this wonderful interview. So it was, I believe, very useful for many people, and I hope that people will find this interview in a positive way. Before we finish, I'd like to also get your message for the control engineering people in Turkey and also control students in Turkey, because you live in the United States. So how do you see control engineering in Turkey from the other side of the Atlantic, and what do you suggest for Turkish engineers?
Well, of course, I've only been, it's hard for me to talk about Turkey because I don't know it very well. I've been there, I think, twice, but at least once.
Yes, I remember that one.
Yes, and that was maybe at the same conference 10 years ago or something like that.
2016,
Okay.
you were with the council, I believe. Were you?
Yes,
Yeah.
I was, yes.
That was a council meeting, so I remember that you were there.
Yes, that's right. Well, I appreciate the invitation to talk to your folks, and I certainly hope your conference is very successful. I understand it has a history flavor. That's interesting me.
Yes.
I encourage everybody to read the book, the IFAC story, which is on the IFAC website
Yeah, sure.
and available. And I guess I'm a believer that the more you know about the history of an organization or a field, the better, the easier it will be to contribute. And
Yes.
I do also know the younger generation, and I see all kinds of problems.
Yes.
And who knows what, I mean, I can tell you in the court system, in the social system, I've seen it, I do it. I deal with it every day. But most people don't.
Yes, unfortunately.
And if there's any other thought, ask me that related question again, just so I can.
Especially I'd like to get your message for engineers in Turkey, and
Yeah.
especially the students in Turkey.
Yeah.
If you have any message, and how do you see control engineering done in Turkey from your perspective?
Well, it could very well be that in some countries, maybe Turkey, it's even more, could contribute even more in the social area. It depends on your industries. Of course, process industries and mechanical fields really need it. But if you want to bring more people in, especially women,
Yeah.
minorities, I don't know what the minorities are, I don't want to get into that discussion if there are minorities, but it broadens, it opens up what we do to a larger audience, and they then communicate that into their special areas. And so I would say to Turkish young engineers, don't think the only route is to a professorship. If you are interested in automotive, plenty of applications there. If you turn out to be interested more in the soft sciences, the social sciences, there's a real place for you there.
All right.
The field is open. We are an enabling technology, and we enable all over the place. But because we're all over the place, people don't recognize us. We're everywhere. And don't let that worry you. It's a problem that will be readily overcome.
Yeah.
And again, I appreciate, I'm honored to be asked. At my age, I don't like to travel so much. I'm saying that from Japan, of course, but the IFAC Congress is something I wanted to do. And I recognized the invitation, and you invited me to come.
Yeah.
And I thought this might be just matching my skills and my age. It might be better to do it this way. I hope it works out for you.
Okay. In any case, thanks once again for this interview and giving your thoughts to our audience. It's a pity that we couldn't have you in Turkey,
Yes.
in Istanbul,
Yeah.
but thank you anyway for for this interview, and hopefully we will have some chat through Zoom. We don't know
Of course.
We'll see.
Yeah,
Okay.
I like to do things that the audience appreciates, and just
Yes.
say it that way. But
All
again,
right.
it's great. It's an honor to be asked to come over,
Okay.
and I just felt this was better.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Sure.